of you guys remember this also. But it's funny because I'd heard the stories all my life about the Phantom House at Bachelor's Grove, but I never knew what it was supposed to look like. I never had read other people's descriptions about it. I just knew it was supposed to be there, as well as these phantom lights and things like that, but I didn't know enough about it to have a prejudgment about it. We just went there on a spring night thinking that we were going to take some pictures and sneak in and have like a good time, and that would be that, you know. So I will tell you all about this experience. In April 2009, I was at a cemetery after dark with a group of about 8 people. After exploring quietly on our own, we were mysteriously drawn together near the entrance of the cemetery, where we made small talk until one of us noticed a round light glowing through the woods. It came in the direction of the path leading back to the road. We all observed this light, having not seen it earlier in the night. I stood wondering if the light was coming from a distant street light, a house on the other side of the woods, the moon, or even an illuminated street sign. A few of us made similar remarks out loud as we watched the light change shape. It took on the form of a rectangular window with a cross-patterned wooden pane. Its glow was soft and evoked a sensation of reading by candlelight or low light. This cozy image, though, was offset by a deep feeling of menace. The feeling almost like we were being violated and looked into by whatever it was that was creating this window that we were looking into. So the image developed further in my mind, which is hard to explain, but I'm sure a lot of you guys know what I'm talking about. It kind of just popped into my head, was this image of a house around this window, an old-fashioned, classic-looking white house with a porch swing. And somehow this normally benign, classic image was still really unsettling. We decided to follow the light to see if we could find its origin. As if in a trance, we all got on the path and started walking away from the cemetery and towards the light. And at that point, it lost its window shape and became round again and seemed to move alongside the path with us, but it was off in the distance, and it would get higher and lower, but it was thick enough for us to see the tree branches in front of it as it would move. None of us were able to capture it on film because, again, none of us brought the kind of equipment that we thought we would need to capture it, and it would be difficult to get it anyway. But at the time, this many years ago, we had a couple digital cameras and some audio recorders, and like an old analog recorder that weighed like 8 pounds. So none of us had the right equipment, and we didn't catch it. But before we knew it, we were actually back out on the road. So instead of saying anything about it or doing anything about it, we filed quietly into our van and didn't talk about how strange this whole experience was at all. It was like it had lured us out of the cemetery, and it wasn't until I actually got home that I sort of snapped out of it and realized what had happened and started to think about it. And about 2 weeks later, we all got together at a CGHG meeting and sort of corroborated that we had all been in this trance, and then figured out later that something was deeply weird about what had happened. But at the time, we hadn't given it a second thought. We just got in the van and we drove away. So this experience was actually pretty disturbing, as well as the images of the window and the house, which were sort of like burnt into my mind. And I had a hard time talking about them for a long time because it was just so creepy, because again, it doesn't fit neatly into our concept of ghosts and spirits and things like that. This house, whatever it is, that, I felt was looking back at us too, and sort of almost toying with us, I guess would be, the way to say it. So, as someone who has studied and experienced the supernatural for years, I just could not place this into any neat and clean category. I don't feel that what happened to us was associated with the good people that are buried there, but something darker that I think has to do with the land itself, and probably what the years of desecration and what people make it out to be. So people make Bachelor's Grove into something that's super haunted and evil and things like that, and I think that energy gathers, and then that's what it is, whereas it's also this beautiful, peaceful place, and these people who are buried here are just regular people. So But I do feel more empowered to talk about it now, obviously, because I'm talking about it. But I visited Bachelor's Grove several times since this happened. One time we got completely lost in the woods and got turned around like in the Blair Witch Project. It's like a square mile area, and we got lost for hours, and we were so scared until we finally saw a guy in the distance, like wearing a red baseball cap, and we shouted for him and followed. Hidden back to the trail, and this was in broad daylight, and I think the next April or 2 Aprils later. But I do know that that's a very special place. But the coolest, so not only that, but then my research later, finding out that other people have had this experience with the lights bouncing, with the same type of house, and that they described this house the same way, I just thought was so fascinating. It, made me feel like I wasn't crazy, and I used that term earlier, but also that, many people have shared this experience. So those are the stories that I wanted to share. I don't know how long I've been talking, but if anybody has any questions, I can answer them now, or I can read another one. Does anybody have questions about anything in the world? Okay.
I heard the house story like 20 years ago from a friend of mine, and I thought he was just making it up.
Yeah.
And, because he wasn't the kind of reputable person that you would be like, oh, yeah, okay. But, yeah, and he referred to it as like a house that flies through the woods.
Right, that it shows up in different places.
Different places.
There's no foundation large enough for this house to have been where people say it is.
Yeah.
It's true. Right, I thought that too, that it was just this cool kind of story that went along with the place, just one of those, because it used to be a lover's lane and all this kind of stuff, and people would just make up the most wild and crazy stories, and so...
Yeah, and I thought it was wild and crazy coming from him,
And then we actually saw this happen right in front of our eyes. And they even got it on, I guess, Ghost Adventures. They got the dancing lights in the woods. And I like to watch that show for entertainment, but when I saw that episode, I was like, that's what happened to us. It's like, that's crazy. I feel so much better now. But, does anybody have you guys had similar experiences at Bachelor's Grove or crazy? Does anybody want to share a story? Yeah, go ahead.
Well, along the lines of Bachelor's Grove, I've been there many times, and I've had experiences that I thought were eerie, like animals approaching me, and time that elapsed. It felt like minutes, but it was hours.
Right.
But my uncle, back in the 70s, used to make movies, and so you would go into the woods and stuff like that with his friend. And the story that he has is fascinating to me because I don't think that he would lie, not my uncle. And the story was kind of like your own, where he got lost in the woods and he was searching for his way out, and they entered in to the cemetery, and they were exploring the woods there. And finally, when they found their way out, they came out of the woods because they saw a road in the distance. And they approached the road and found that somehow, in their sense of finding their direction, they came out on the other side of the road.
Really?
That exact same thing happened. I don't know if you can hold it.
Ooh, that gave me a chill. Yeah?
But I got in there at night with Pete, Arabia, marked and mapped the trail.
Right.
Estimated that he'd been there 2,000 times over the last 15 years. And walked blindfolded and find his way anywhere back there. And we got lost for 4.5 hours. And kept seeing the road, kept seeing the lights of houses and cars going by. Would walk towards us and it would be like we were in a vacuum.
Wow.
Pitch black, dead silent, and could not for the life of us find our way out. 4.5 hours later, we came out in a different place than we thought we were,
And there's...
GPS on our phones were.
Oh my God. And how can you come out on the other side of the road if you haven't crossed a road while you're It would be so. And along the lines what you were saying too about like time lapses, when we got lost, we didn't think we were lost for that long, but it turned out we were lost for a long time. Like half the afternoon was gone when we found this guy in a red cap, like walking in the distance, and we didn't feel like we'd been lost for that long, and it turned out that like 3 hours had passed. So yeah, I just think that, you know, and like to qualify myself, like I go hiking in, you know, like hiking, like you were saying with Pete knowing the place in and out, like I've been hiking in the wilderness in Montana and stuff like that, so it's not like we're just like silly city people like wandering through the bushes or something, like, so, does anybody else have any questions or things they'd like to share?
Now I know we had that time lapse, you know, and I got me over in the, we were out at the Rose, when Kevin and I were in the Roseville Mausoleum.
Oh, that's another great place.
Yeah, we were there, and it didn't seem like we were there that long, and all of a sudden we're looking at the numbers, like, it was like 4 hours later, we're like, how did we end up spending most of the time in that mausoleum?
Rose Hill is just one of those places where every time I've ever been there, something paranormal happens. And it's actually, when people visit me in Chicago, sometimes they say, oh, Amelia, let's go ghost hunting, it'll be fun. I've never been ghost hunting before. And I take them to the mausoleum because it's like an amusement park. You just know something's going to happen. There's always a noise, and there's never anybody there. You know, so you always have the place to yourself. And, you know, so you know when stuff's happening. It's very... Yeah, that's another one.
Yeah, it's nice the way that guy that works there, he'll like tell you, he goes, oh, you know, no video cameras, no records, and then he disappears.
Yeah, he totally disappears. He knows what people are up to in there. He knows that, you know, this giant group of 8 people didn't all come to pay respects to someone's relative. Yeah, we're not all related. Yeah. So, well, I can read one more story and then I'll wrap it up and we can... I'll let you guys get back to your drinks. But I'll tell you the story of the Jericho Bridge, which to me, you know, the Jericho Bridge in Maryland is, is the equivalent of Bachelor's Grove here. So the Jericho Bridge is one of the last, I think 2 or 3 covered bridges in Maryland. So it's already cool for that regard. But it's also sort of like a rite of passage site, and it's one of those places that people